Hello everyone, welcome to a little news update. Today we're going to talk about the balance pass that happened in 7.4 and the upcoming tier 10 ship modules for the Hakuryu and the Midway. So let's get straight into it. Number 1, in 7.4 there was a balance pass that happened to the Hakuryu and the Midway. The Midway had its total plane capacity reduced from 136 down to 116 planes total. This basically reduced its endurance over the whole battle, and the Hakuryu got its plane count didn't change, but its fighter waves shifted from 2 waves to 3 waves, and its dive bombers went from 3 waves down to 2. The internal numbers also shifted around, so ultimately there was a few more torpedo bombers, and the total fighter plane count bumped up from 25 to 30. Now this is a very good buff for the Hakuryu's air control, and it means that both CVs are somewhat viable in that they have this roughly the same endurance in terms of over a long game, in terms of plane losses. They have roughly the same amount of air control, although you would favour probably the Hakuryu's 3 waves to 2, but it's an argument. And it's generally being received somewhat well in terms of statistics and numbers. Now, the numbers, the player base, the numbers the statistic getting it from is purely from randoms. They're not getting any numbers from ranked, or they're not getting any numbers from competitive game modes. And balanced in ranked, currently the Midway, believe it or not, is actually the preferred ship because of its ability to armor-piercing dive bomb cruisers and delete them. So it's get 2 punches to the Hakuryu's 1 set of attack, which is the torpedo bombers, and that's all it can do. It can't really do anything with its dive bombers because they don't have the same kind of damage output. But that is for ranked. In randoms, the Hakuryu is still as powerful as it always has been, but the Midway remains competitive. Just needs to be careful of anything that's got kind of defensive fire for its tier torpedo bombers. And then in competitive, currently the Hakuryu is still top dog. There's no question about it. 332 and 422 Hakuryu just dominates the Midway because it's an extremely heavy AA environment. If ranked was the one side of the spectrum where nobody takes any AA skills or defensive fire, then competitive is completely the opposite side. How heavily organized teams, overlapping defensive fires, long range AA, you just simply can't compete. So that is the current balance pass. In randoms, it is fine. In ranked and competitive, it's interesting how they take 2 separate kind of splits, designed for kind of different roles. Second set of news today is the tier 10 module upgrades that we're talking about. So all tier 10 ships are getting a sort of side grade to their module 6. Now if you're asking what is the module 6 upgrade for carriers, it is attack aircraft HP increased by 15%. Now this is usually mandatory for both ships, but it's especially so for the Midway that uses tier 8 torpedo bombers and needs to increase its health to be viable. An alternative is, however, the flight control modification 2, which gives you 5% plane speed. You can argue that the increased speed means you can get to target faster, which means your overall damage in the game will increase because the planes are going there and back. And you can also argue that if you're inside the enemy A bubble less, then it's the same as having more health. And it's kind of true, but you can't scout as well because your planes have less health. They can't loiter inside an A bubble. So there's plus and minuses, but typically the increased health is seen as the favorable upgrade to get. Now, that being said, what happens when we take Midway plus 30% attack aircraft survivability? Well, it's not actually 30%, it's only an additional 15% because you're already using the 50% module. So that's one thing. You're going to lose aircraft speed though, 5%. That's going to hurt, especially when the planes are quite slow. And we'll talk about this in this moment and in more detail. And the Hakuryu it loses that 50% attack health increase. You gotta keep that in mind. You're losing that 50% health, so it's not all buffs. But you are gaining 5% to maximum aircraft speed, so that's like really good. So even though you're losing health from the bombers, you're gaining speed, but so are the fighters. Well, that's great. And then also you're getting 15% to fighter HP. Wow, that's like really good as well. Where's the downside here? So this is what actually got me confused. So I went and spoke with the devs on these community contributor section, and I asked, and I'm going to read this off here somewhat quickly. In my opinion, the side grays are not very balanced. Partly I'm asking, why are you introducing extra elements to carriers if you're going to do a rework anyway, but I didn't get a response to that. Now, let's go. Let me elaborate. The Midway has an additional 15% plane health, which is great for torpedo bombers, bumping their health from 1,796 to 2,334, but it painfully reduces their speed from 136 to 129 knots. This means more planes will survive to bomb a target, but their flight time is increased, and not to mention that they're more vulnerable to fighter interception, be it Japanese or American. Overall, the damage may remain the same, because more planes survive getting to the target and bombing it, but ultimately there's more pressure on getting each bomb run perfect. So you're going to have fewer total bomb runs, so each one is precious, and you're going to have to do it well, and that's kind of a bad thing, I think. However, the problems for the Midway don't end there, because the fighters receive a minus 5% speed nerf, which is particularly painful on the Midway because it uses tier 9 fighters, so which means they're slower than tier 10s. So they're running at 178 knots currently, but that's going to be nerfed down to 169 knots with the speed nerf. And that's pretty darn slow for tier 10 battles. And it causes 3 real problems. Bomber interception, having to fly around 8.6 kilometer AA bubbles, so that is the Moskva, Minotaur, and soon to be introduced Worcester, and trying to fly out of those bubbles is also going to be nasty. And then the inability to chase down and stop scouting planes, specifically those Japanese dive bombers. They're going to be so fast now, so if they drop payload, that you're not going to be able to chase them and corner them. They'll be able to fly around corners and you won't be able to catch them, so it's going to be a pain. But then again, the problems don't stop there either. The Hakuryu fighters get 50% health. That means their health goes from 2,558 to 2,941 health per plane, while the Midway fighters remain at 2,407. So it's quite a big difference in plane health. It may be enough to make up for the fact that you've only got 5 planes in the wave compared to the 7 waves of the American. Now, combine this with the Haku's 3 new fighter waves, I don't necessarily see how the Midway can ever compete for air control, and is entirely reliant, this being the Midway, on strafe mechanics, which is very risky because the first person to engage in a strafe often loses to a dodge and a counter strafe. So, the Hakuryu module, it does indeed, as we mentioned, loses the 15% bomber HP, and that reduces our torpedo bombers from 2,540 health to 2,165, and the dive bombers go from 2,451 down to 2,083 health. However, they gain the 5% plane speed boost, and this means that the Japanese bomber are worse off at scouting because they can't stay in an area longer, but however the fighters are better and they're also faster, so they could also fulfill the scout role slightly if they needed to, and more or less the bombers are just as effective at bombing because, provided you take the correct approach in enemy AA, you are faster, so you can bomb and then you can get out. But it's not as good as health, right? But I get that. But the fact is, it's a nerf to the plane health, but you're getting that little buff to the speed, which the Americans don't get. They don't get, like, they get a nerf to their bomber speed and they get a bonus to their survivability. Okay, that's fine. You give something, you take away from the bombers, but the fighters are receiving a nerf as well, which hurts because the fighters don't get any kind of buff to counteract the fact that they're now slower. And if I go into this a little bit more, I kind of lost my tracking here. Yes, and then even better, the fighters gain a 5% speed boost as well. This is the Japanese ones. So that bumps their speed from 180 knots to 189. This means that 189 Japanese fighter speed versus 169 of the American speed means there's a 20 knot difference in speed. That is a huge advantage for the Japanese fighters, dictating when they want to fight and how they engage or how they chase down. And it means that the Haku has better plane interception, it can fly around AA bubbles faster, getting to where it needs to be, and that the fighters can also, if they need to be and you're desperate, using the scouting role because they've got more health and they've got more speed. So it's kind of more flexibility and more map control. So in conclusion, it kind of feels like the Midway trades a lot of functionality and flexibility with a reduction of plane speed for increased bomber health, while the Haku honestly gains in air control with the fighter buffs, and it doesn't really suffer that much with their bombers because they also get the speed increase. You combine the two factions together, the reduced speed for the Americans and the increased speed for the Japanese, if both carriers take these kind of side grades, and it heavily tips the kind of game balance, I feel, in the Japanese favor. So there are a couple of solutions that can go about this. One is remove the speed nerf for the American fighters, or one is remove the speed nerf for the American fighters and remove the speed buff for the Japanese fighters, or, you know, perhaps remove the speed buff to the Japanese bombers but only give the health bonus to the the Japanese fighters. There's a number of ways going about this. I did mention this to Wargaming directly. They did get back to me, and ultimately their words are simply that it's not their final decision. They're very grateful for the feedback, and they're going to test that more and see. So hopefully they'll go away and do that, because in the current iteration, what we have, it's not really feels that balanced. They understand the mechanics. They're basically trying to make it so the Haku's more micro-controlled, and it has slightly better fire control, and they're trying to make the Midway more of a bomber thing. But that is dangerous, because if the Midway can't fly its planes to intercept because they are slower, they can't have as much map presence or as much match control. And with the fighters being the Japanese so fast, they can just fly around the American ones all day long. And if the American CV Midway wants to bomb, it probably has to protect its bombers due to the speed and the interception of the Japanese one, so it has to use its fighters in the protection role. That then plays into the Japanese, because he's going to be flying over friendly AA, he's going to be using his fighters to engage your fighters and go after your bombers, and then while your bombers are being protected by your fighters, it means your fighters are not protecting your fleet, so the entire Japanese bombers are going around and they're going to go attack something without having to worry about fighter interception. So it's kind of awkward at the current moment. It needs a bit more work in my opinion. But anyway, that is the carrier update and news. The balance past 7.4. New modules are incoming sometime soon, but are currently in super test for all the tier 10 ships. As and when we find out more, I will talk to you more about it. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. If you've got any questions, put them down in the comments on YouTube, and I'll put them forward to Wargaming and get you some answers. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.